Imagine a country the size of a continent faulting, a nation whose streets pulse with protest, whose markets strain under inflation, whose government fights for survival. And then imagine that whole structure suddenly giving way. What happens next is not a tidy political transition or a quick reset button on history. It is instead a seismic shift, geopolitical, social, economic, and human, that would ripple outward in ways few could fully predict, yet many would immediately feel in their daily lives. The collapse of Iran's state apparatus, whether through internal fracture, economic breakdown, elite defection, or violent confrontation, would not be a local event confined within Tehran's embattled boulevards. It would be a shockwave across the Middle East, reshaping alliances, power balances, and strategic calculations. On the ground, the first reality would be a power vacuum, a vacuum that rivals and factions would instantly pressure to fill. Without a central authority, the risk of civil war would skyrocket. Ethnic and regional groups within Iran, Kurds in the northwest, Baluch in the southeast, Arabs in the southwest, each have long-standing grievances and distinct identities. In a fractured Iran, their competing visions could fuel conflict rather than consensus. No unified successor would automatically rise. Instead, an array of militias, political movements, and opportunistic leaders would vie for influence, potentially dragging neighboring countries into the fray as well. Regionally, the collapse would reset the balance of power across West Asia. Iran currently acts as a counterweight to Saudi Arabia, a strategic partner to groups like Hezbollah and the Assad regime in Syria, and a geopolitical foil to Israel. Without that access in place, new alignments would form, perhaps strengthening Gulf Cooperation Council states and pushing others into fresh rivalries. Israel would find its strategic landscape altered overnight, with both threats and opportunities redefined. Gulf nations might push for greater security cooperation with the West, while Russia and China would reassess their positions, wary of losing a critical ally and facing an unpredictable Middle Eastern mosaic. Economically, the collapse of Iran would be felt far beyond its borders. Iran is a key player in global energy markets because of its location near the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which an enormous portion of the world's oil supply flows. Disruption there, whether through closure, conflict, or fragmented control, would almost certainly lead to spiking oil prices, pressure on global inflation, and unpredictable disruptions to energy markets from Asia to Europe. This wouldn't be weeks of volatility. It could mean months of economic tremors, affecting transportation costs, manufacturing, and everyday energy bills for consumers worldwide. Humanitarian conditions would also deteriorate rapidly. A collapsed state cannot provide basic services, maintain public order, or ensure food security. Millions of Iranians, already struggling under economic crisis, could find themselves without water infrastructure, healthcare, or shelter. Human displacement on a massive scale could follow, creating waves of refugees seeking safety in neighboring Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, and beyond. The logistical strain on host countries and international organizations would be tremendous, and the human cost unimaginable. Another critical risk lies in power transition. One might assume that the fall of a repressive regime would usher in democracy, peace, and prosperity, but history warns otherwise. When central authority collapses with no clear successor, extremist or authoritarian groups often rise instead, sometimes more brutal and less predictable than the system they replace. Iran's elite military force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for instance, could attempt to seize control, establishing a military dictatorship cloaked in legitimacy, furthering repression rather than freedom for civilians. International actors would be drawn in, each seeking to protect interests or influence outcomes. The United States might attempt to support democratic movements or stabilize key regions, while Russia and China might try to counterbalance such efforts to maintain strategic footholds. But well-intentioned intervention, whether diplomatic, economic, or military, has rarely produced orderly transitions in places undergoing state collapse. Instead, it often compounds volatility, prolongs conflict, and deepens humanitarian suffering.
In short, the collapse of Iran would not be a singular event. It would be a cascade of crises and recalibrations, internal dissension erupting into violence, power vacuums inviting competition, regional equations rewritten, global markets jolted, and millions of ordinary lives upended. While some envision a post-collapse Iran as a beacon of reform and modernization, the more immediate reality would likely resemble a complex and combustible transformation zone, unstable, contested, and fraught with unintended consequences.